Hello, hello, welcome again. This is the weekly episode. This week's topic is emotional entitlement. When it comes to our emotions or our own emotions and the justification of mood, we often proclaim all manner of entitled space and candor with regards to our feelings and the need to either be heard or receive some sort of space and time to vent. Well, I won't argue that each of us have a myriad of choices in front of us on how, when, and if we might express ourselves. What I have began noticing more lately is a sense of emotional entitlement. The reality is there really isn't any governance that exists what would preclude us from feeling something or acting out a certain way or expressing ourselves. In fact, what we feel can be an honest grounding element, or the emotion that we have oftentimes is our data, it's our fact, and it's our truth. And so in fact, what we feel, if it can be an honest grounding element in any assessment that we make, we find ourselves seeking and trying to express those emotions often. So feeling, however, doesn't always translate to an external manifestation of one's present state of being. So whether we suppress our emotions or we're open about our emotions, again, it remains a choice that's available to each of us based on our own awareness of self and the established biases that we each hold on to. Manipulation, however, based on those biases, is often displayed as an open criticism of others. Let me read that one more time and spell that out. Manipulation, however, is based on our own biases, and it's often displayed as an open criticism of others. What I've noticed is that what people most often complain about is typically behavior that they are all too familiar with themselves. Let me repeat that a couple times. What people complain about is typically behavior they are all too familiar with themselves. One more time. When we're looking at somebody else's behavior and we're being critical of that, or we're being vocal and emotional about that behavior, oftentimes the reason it's so raw for us is that it's typically behavior that we're very familiar with ourselves. So this isn't an accusation, but rather it's a stark awareness, as I've been guilty myself and a culprit in my own life at times. So when emotion moves from an internal feeling to an external mode of manipulation or justification, pair it with a rant, therein lies the obstacle. See, emotion is either rich with connection or it's ripe with expulsion. As it goes, let me draw attention to three terms and or concepts that show up for each of us as we're these complex organisms that are thriving and jiving in this imperfection. So the first one is a term referred to as counterfeit emotional language. Second one is rational emotive approach. And the third is emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is probably a term many of you are familiar with, but I'm going to go through each of the terms I just mentioned and we'll tie those together and how it relates. So counterfeit emotional language. It's a form of communication that seems to express feelings, but it doesn't quite describe what a person's honest internal state might be. At times, one could consider this an element of cordial hypocrisy. Rational emotional approach uses rational thinking to challenge and change debilitating emotions that undermine self-concept and self-esteem. So this rationalization can come from ourselves or others, sometimes as a defense mechanism and other times as a mechanism for change. Emotional intelligence is the unique ability to recognize your own feelings And it's paired with that fortitude to really assess when those emotions might be appropriate given certain circumstance. It also engages a maturity and a skill to communicate those feelings effectively. When it comes to our emotional state, our physiology, our perceptions, and social experiences, they all come into play. In a self-serving state, we become less effective when we express our emotions in generalities and without ownership or in a state of counterfeit. A colleague of mine recently and a fellow coach in a conversation that we were in, he brought some serious heat when he explained this. And he explained it to our entire group as we were working together on a project. Kermit said this. He said, "We often judge others based on their actions, but ourselves based on our intentions. It's often not a different story, just a different perspective." Kermit Jones, you are a genius. I'll say that one more time. He said this, "We often judge others based on their actions, but ourselves based on our intentions." He went on to say it's often not a different story, just a different perspective. So thank you, Kermit. Fantastic insight, and certainly a statement that gives pause and introspect. So here's the summary as I try to break it down. During times of increased self-awareness and growth, know that associated upheaval and transformation will always be present and will always leave you in a state of confusion and uncertainty. Right now, the whole world seems to be tossed upside down. A lot of upheaval, a lot of transformation happening. Know that in those times of growth, in those times of awareness, in the times of transformation, it's always going to leave you with a state of confusion and uncertainty. Confusion about the present, uncertainty about the future, sometimes even uncertainty about the present. That's how it's supposed to be. Growth and transformation does leave you in a state of upheaval. So with that, have faith. However, in the fact that we're designed around predictability. What I mean by that is have faith to the extent that we move forward knowing that we can't control some of the uncontrollables, but also a strong acknowledgement that we were designed, each of us were designed around unpredictability. Uncertainty is scary for sure, but it's in this uncertainty that we gain a new paradigm. In this paradigm, might I challenge us all to consider that while we're fully entitled to our own emotions, we're never entitled to the emotions that are associated with dismissive behaviors and criticisms of another, particularly when it comes to the behavior, which is one that we've too been guilty of in our times of imperfection. Slow down. Be less quick to allow frustration and anger to enter into your world. Let us be thoughtful in our reflection and judgment of self along our own journey before we release an entitled assessment of someone else. Remember that growth is always a choice. Until next week, my friends, make it a great one, and remember to always honor the gift.